This is the forward operating base, which means you're in the middle of the city. Camp Falcon.
And that's
me.
you?
Yeah, I was the executive officer of the company.
And you were a lieutenant?
I was a lieutenant.
As a U.S. Marine, J.J. Hansen survived combat in Iraq. But after he got home, his life was suddenly in peril.
We were having a lunch meeting, and all of a sudden I started getting this intense feeling, and my hands started to shake and started to sweat. And I said, guys, there's something wrong with me. You need to call 911.
I got the phone call from the EMT telling me that he had had a seizure, and it was nothing but a feeling of shock. My perfectly healthy husband was in the hospital.
After an MRI, the news got worse. Kristen Hansen's 33-year-old husband was diagnosed with brain cancer.
I had a prognosis, likely 4 months to live. In the best case scenario, I could possibly make it a year.
Hansen underwent surgery and chemotherapy. He struggled through 9 more seizures while losing his ability to talk and walk.
I'm thinking, what do I do here? Do I continue to fight? Do I give up? Is life worth living? Is it worth going on and feeling this pain? Cut the slices out?
Yeah, that should work.
J.J. Hansen found himself in the midst of the same daunting struggle as Brittany Maynard, who also suffered from brain cancer.
I refuse to subject myself and my family to purposeless, prolonged pain and suffering at the hands of an incurable disease.
Maynard made national news in 2014 when she moved to Oregon so she could legally receive a prescription for a lethal combination of pills.
She vowed to end her life on her own terms, and over the weekend, she did, taking lethal drugs prescribed by a doctor.
Her story inspired a change in her home state. California recently became the 5th state to legalize aid in dying. The law will take effect later this year. A Gallup poll last May shows nearly 7 in 10 Americans support it. It almost feels like there was kind of a dam that has broken, and suddenly everybody is talking about this.
It's not toxic, it's not taboo anymore.
Barbara Coombs-Lee heads up an advocacy group called Compassion and Choices. She co-wrote the first-in-the-nation Oregon law passed in 1994. It enables terminally ill, mentally competent people to ask a doctor for life-ending drugs.
It's the individual who initiates a request, who undertakes a number of steps in order to gain eligibility. And then the last safeguard, a very important one, is that person has to administer the medication themselves.
Our life together.
But no such law exists in New York State, where the Hansens live.
He loved birds. He was like insanely in love with birds, which meant he did not like squirrels.
And where Eve Eliot shared a home with Jim Del Grosso, her husband of more than 2 decades.
He was my true, true love, and I fell intensely in love with him immediately.
But in 2012, her true love, a professional painter, was diagnosed with ALS, known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's incurable. He quickly lost the use of his hands and then control of his entire body.
To see him not be able to hold a paintbrush or a spoon, his life had actually left him, is what happened. His life left. He was in his body, but his life was gone. And to see him be a prisoner of his body was unbelievably and indescribably painful, awful.
To end his suffering, Del Grosso made an excruciating decision.
We had talked about it for hours and hours and hours. We had talked about it for hours, trying to find a way to help him get out of this prison.
With no other legal option in New York State, Del Grosso stopped eating and drinking. He died days later from dehydration.
He was in this terrible prison, and it was his own body. I want people to hear this. If you have not had this kind of experience or been very close to someone who's had this experience, you really can't know. You just can't know.
Comfort at the end of life shouldn't be an accident of your geography. Everyone should be able to feel comfortable at the end of life.
To make that possible, Barbara Coombs-Lee says her team now has set its sights on New York as the next battlefront. What's your game plan in New York State?
To take people who have firm beliefs and turn them into activists.
Eve Eliot's already on board, but there are still many opponents, including folks you might not expect.
If this is legalized in New York State, you're going to see immediately the negative outcomes.
Yes, after he briefly contemplated ending his own life, J.J. Hansen is still fighting. Almost 2 years after his diagnosis, he's finished his chemo and he heads the Patients' Rights Action Fund against aid in dying. Why do you feel that you can make this decision for not just yourself, but for other people?
If you have a full legalization across the United States, people like me will start to look at assisted suicide as their only alternative. And I was told twice by doctors, your time is done. They told me basically that I was dead. Where does your hope go? What is your agreement to move forward?
The American Medical Association is on Hansen's side. Its code of medical ethics reads, allowing physicians to participate in assisted suicide would cause more harm than good. Hansen also fears economic injustice.
If you're looking at someone who's very poor and this is the only alternative they have because their insurance company will not fund their chemotherapy, well, now it starts to become a problem.
But Coombs-Lee says it's just the opposite.
The injustice right now is that there is a huge underground practice of aid in dying. Doctors write prescriptions with winks and nods, but the people who can avail themselves of that are people of wealth, people of stature, people who play golf with their doctor.
In Oregon, she says, one big sign that legalized assisted dying works is the fact that a third of those who get lethal prescriptions in a given year never end up using them. Do you think that just knowing that your husband would have had the option to get a prescription would have eased the anxiety for you?
Oh my God, I would have been so grateful because he would have felt so validated, so understood, so actually taken care of, so heard. He would have felt heard.
Are you Superman?
Yeah. Say, I'm flying.
I'm flying.
But the Hansens are focusing not on what might have been, but on what could be.
The reason that we felt we needed to speak up and share our story is because we've seen that you can beat the odds. And we're afraid for all those people who will hear that dire prognosis and just accept it.